The city council chamber in Portland, Oregon was quiet that Tuesday evening. The kind of quiet that comes before something important happens. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows, a steady rhythm that matched the slow ticking of the wall clock above the council seats. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old wood, coffee, and the lemon-scented cleaner the janitor used every morning. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow on the rows of empty chairs in the public gallery. Only a few people had arrived so far, mostly regulars who came to every meeting, notebooks in hand, pens ready. At the front of the room, behind a long curved table, 5 city council members sat in high-backed chairs. They wore suits and blazers, their faces calm and professional. Council President Diane Cho sat in the center. She was in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun and glasses that she kept pushing up her nose. She had been on the council for 12 years and had seen it all: angry protests, tearful pleas, long debates that went nowhere. But she believed in order. She believed in process. And most of all, she believed in politeness. In her view, civility was the glue that held democracy together, even when people disagreed. To her right sat Councilman Robert Reynolds, a former real estate developer with a firm handshake and a voice that never rose above a calm baritone. He liked data, spreadsheets, and smart growth. To her left was Councilwoman Aisha Patel, the youngest member at 39, known for her sharp questions and her habit of quoting neighborhood kids during meetings. The other 2 members, Thomas Green and Maria Lopez, were quieter, often nodding along or scribbling notes they rarely shared. Down in the front row of the public seats, Marcus Lynn sat alone. He wore a faded blue hoodie and jeans, his laptop closed on his lap. Marcus worked as a software engineer for a small tech company downtown. He wasn't the type to speak at city meetings, but tonight was different. He lived in the Crestwood neighborhood, one of the older parts of the city where sidewalks cracked and streetlights flickered. The city had promised new bike lanes there 2 years ago. Nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the new luxury condos in the Pearl District got their protected bike paths in 6 months. Marcus had tried emails, calls, even a polite letter. No reply. So tonight he'd come in person. A few seats over, Elena Ruiz adjusted her cardigan. She was 72, retired after 40 years teaching 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. Her hair was white and cut short, her eyes sharp behind round glasses. She'd come to support the bike lane project, not because she rode a bike, she hadn't since 1968, but because she believed safe streets mattered, especially for kids walking to school. She'd brought a thermos of chamomile tea and a small notepad. She always took notes. You never know when someone will say something worth remembering, she liked to tell her grandchildren. More people trickled in. A young couple with a baby in a carrier, a man in a construction vest, 2 teenagers with skateboards tucked under their arms. By 7 o'clock, the room was half full, about 30 people. Not a crowd, but enough to show interest. The meeting was supposed to be routine. Agenda item number 4, discussion on Phase 2 of the citywide active transportation plan. In plain words, where to put the next set of bike lanes. Diane Cho tapped her gavel lightly. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out on such a rainy night. We'll keep this meeting efficient and respectful, as always. Public comment will be open after staff presentation. 3 minutes per speaker, please. A city planner named Greg stood at the podium and clicked through slides on a projector screen. Maps, traffic counts, safety statistics. He spoke in a flat, even tone using words like modal share and infrastructure prioritization. Most people in the room only half listened. They'd heard it before. What they really wanted was the chance to speak themselves. Marcus glanced at his watch. He felt nervous. He wasn't used to talking in front of officials. At work, he communicated through code. Clean, logical, no room for misunderstanding. But human speech was messy. What if he stumbled? What if they ignored him again? He took a deep breath and reminded himself why he was here. Because his niece, 8 years old, had to walk past speeding cars every morning to get to school. Because last month a neighbor's dog was hit by a truck on their street. Because efficient shouldn't mean only for the rich parts of town. Elena noticed Marcus fidgeting. She gave him a small smile. He nodded back. She'd seen that look before in her students right before they raised their hand to answer a hard question. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, she used to tell them. It was speaking anyway. Up at the council table, Robert Reynolds checked his phone under the table. A text from his assistant. Developer group wants to meet Thursday about waterfront project. He sighed quietly. He loved this city, truly. But sometimes the endless meetings about bike lanes and crosswalks felt like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. Real progress, he believed, came from big investments, not paint on the road. Still, he kept his face neutral. He knew how this worked. You listened. You nodded. You said thank you for your input. And then you moved on. The staff presentation ended. Diane Cho announced public comment was open. Hands went up. One by one, people walked to the microphone near the center aisle. First was a woman from the Pearl District. She praised the city for finally making our neighborhood safer for cyclists. She spoke clearly, politely, and sat down to light applause. Next was a man from East Portland. He asked why his neighborhood hadn't seen a single bike lane in 10 years. His voice was calm, but his hands shook slightly. Diane thanked him and said the city was working on equity in future phases. Then came Jamal Wright. He wasn't on the sign-up sheet, but he stood anyway. Tall, with a worn denim jacket and close-cropped hair, he walked to the mic with quiet confidence. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. Good evening, he said, his voice low but clear. My name is Jamal Wright. I live in St. John's. I've been coming to these meetings for 3 years. Every time I hear about equity, every time I hear we hear you. But the data tells a different story. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Last week, I filed a public records request. I asked for emails about bike lane funding decisions over the past 18 months. He paused. I got 217 pages. A few council members shifted in their seats. In those emails, Jamal continued, Councilman Reynolds refers to neighborhoods like mine as low-return zones. Councilwoman Patel calls our requests logistically inconvenient. And President Cho, you wrote that pushing too hard on equity could alienate key stakeholders. The room went very still. Even the rain seemed to quiet. Jamal didn't raise his voice. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to ask, when did we decide that some people's safety matters less than others? And when did we agree that being polite means staying silent while that happens? He stepped back from the mic. No one clapped. No one booed. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Diane Cho opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first. She cleared her throat. Mr. Wright, thank you for your comment. We take your concerns seriously. But something had shifted. The usual script, thank you, we hear you next speaker, suddenly felt hollow. People in the audience looked at each other. Marcus sat up straighter. Elena set down her thermos. Jamal returned to his seat, his face unreadable. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't insulted anyone. He'd just spoken the truth, plainly and without decoration. And in that moment, the polite mask that everyone wore at these meetings, the mask of procedure, of patience, of waiting your turn, began to slip. No one knew it yet, but the real meeting was just beginning. The part where people stopped performing civility and started demanding honesty. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Diane Cho glanced at the clock. It was only 7:23 p.m. The meeting was supposed to end by 8:30, but already it felt like everything had changed. She took a slow breath, adjusted her glasses, and said, Next speaker, please. And Marcus Lynn stood up. Marcus Lynn walked slowly to the microphone. His hands were cold and his heart beat fast in his chest. He had never spoken at a city meeting before. At work, he wrote code, clear, exact, and without emotion. But this was different. This was about his street, his neighborhood, his niece who walked to school every morning past cars that never slowed down. He reached the mic and looked up at the council members. They sat behind their tall table, faces calm, pens in hand. They looked ready to listen, but Marcus had seen this before. They would nod, say thank you, and nothing would change. My name is Marcus Lynn, he began, his voice a little shaky. I live on 42nd Avenue in Crestwood. We were told 2 years ago that our street would get bike lanes and better crosswalks. It hasn't happened, he paused, took a breath. I checked the city website last week. The Pearl District got their lanes in 6 months. We've waited 24, why? Councilman Reynolds shifted in his seat. He opened his mouth to speak, but Diane Cho held up a gentle hand. Let him finish, Marcus went on. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the same thing. My niece is 8. She walks to school alone now because my sister works 2 jobs. Last month, a car almost hit her because there's no crosswalk at Maple Street. The driver didn't even stop. His voice didn't rise, but it grew firmer. I sent 3 emails. I called the transportation office twice. I got form replies. Thank you for your input. Your concern has been noted. But nothing happened. So I'm here tonight to ask, does noted mean ignored? He stepped back. The room was silent again. But this time the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken. Frustration, yes, but also a kind of shared understanding. Others in the room had felt the same thing. Diane Cho nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Lin. We appreciate your feedback. We'll look into the delay. But before she could call the next speaker, a woman in the back stood up. She didn't wait for permission. She just walked to the mic. I'm Rosa Mendez, she said. Her voice was soft but clear. I live in Lentz. My son uses a wheelchair. The sidewalks in our area are broken, full of holes. He can't get to the bus stop without help. I asked for repairs 3 times. Each time they said, we'll add it to the list. That list must be very long. She looked at the council. You talk about accessibility in your plans. But for us, it's just words. Then a man in a construction vest stood. I'm Carlos Rivera. I fix roads for the city. I've seen the work orders. We're told to focus on downtown on new developments. Old neighborhoods? Low priority. That's what they tell us on the radio every morning. One by one, people began to speak. Not in the usual way with rehearsed lines and polite requests, but with raw, simple truth. A retired nurse talked about how her block had no streetlights, so she was afraid to go out after dark. A high school student said she biked 5 miles to school because the bus didn't come often enough, and she'd been nearly hit twice. A grandmother said her grandson couldn't play outside because cars sped down their street like it was a racetrack. No one shouted. No one cursed. But the tone had changed. The usual dance of please and thank you was gone. In its place was something quieter, heavier. Honesty. Jamal Wright watched from his seat. He hadn't planned to speak so directly, but something inside him had snapped. He'd spent years being reasonable, waiting his turn, using the right words. And nothing changed. So tonight he decided to stop pretending. Now, as more voices filled the room, he felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because it shouldn't have taken this long for people to be heard. Relief because finally they were speaking. Not as citizens with complaints, but as human beings with lives that mattered. Up at the council table, Diane Cho felt her usual calm slipping away. She was used to managing meetings, keeping things on track, smoothing over tension, but this wasn't tension. This was something deeper. It was like the floor had dropped out from under the room and everyone was standing on bare truth. She glanced at Robert Reynolds. His face was pale. He kept looking down at his notes, but his pen wasn't moving. Aisha Patel sat very still, her eyes wide. She had quoted kids in meetings before, but now she was hearing from the adults who raised them, and the picture was far darker than she'd realized. Next speaker? Diane asked, her voice softer than usual. An elderly man with a cane stood. He moved slowly to the mic. My name is Henry Cho, no relation, he added with a small, tired smile. I'm 81. I've lived in North Portland my whole life. I used to come to these meetings with my wife. She passed last year. She always said, be polite. They'll listen if you're respectful. But they never did. He leaned on his cane. I stopped coming 5 years ago. Too tired of being ignored. But I came tonight because my neighbor told me Jamal was speaking. And I thought, maybe this time is different. He looked around the room. I just want to know, do you see us? Or do you only see the parts of the city that vote, donate, or make headlines? No one answered. No one could. Then Elena Ruiz stood. She walked with small, steady steps to the microphone. She didn't look nervous. She looked sad. I taught 3rd grade for 40 years, she said. Every year I told my students to speak up if something was wrong. Use your voice, I'd say, even if it's hard. But I stopped believing that myself. I thought, at my age, what can I do? So I stayed quiet. She looked at the council. But tonight I remember why I taught those lessons. Because silence helps no one. Not the kids walking to school. Not the elders afraid to leave their homes. Not the families who work hard but live in neighborhoods you forget. She paused. You call it civility when we wait, when we ask nicely, when we accept delays. But real civility isn't silence. It's honesty. It's fairness. It's treating everyone like they matter, not just the ones who live where the cameras point. Her words landed like stones in still water. Ripples moved through the room. Diane Cho opened her mouth to respond, but her throat felt tight. She had always believed she was doing the right thing, keeping order, following rules, being fair. But now she wondered, was fairness just another word for waiting your turn while others got served first? She looked at her watch. It was 7:58 p.m. The meeting was supposed to end in 30 minutes, but no one was thinking about time anymore. Does anyone else wish to speak? She asked. More hands went up. Not many, but enough. A young woman with a baby in a sling. A man who ran a corner store. A teenager with a skateboard. Each one told a simple story. No jargon, no demands. Just facts about their lives, facts the council had never truly seen. And as they spoke, something strange happened. The council members stopped writing notes. They stopped checking phones. They just listened. Really listened. Robert Reynolds finally looked up. I didn't know it was this bad, he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Isha Patel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Diane Cho took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She felt tired, but also awake in a way she hadn't in years. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Inside, the air felt thick with something new. Not anger, not hope exactly, but clarity. The kind that comes when masks fall away and people finally see each other as they are. Jamal Wright sat back in his chair. He hadn't come to start a revolution. He'd just come to say what was true. And somehow that small act had opened a door. Marcus Lynn returned to his seat. His hands were still cold, but his chest felt lighter. He hadn't fixed anything yet, but he'd been heard. That was something. Elena Ruiz sat down and picked up her thermos. She didn't drink. She just held it, feeling its warmth. The meeting wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it was only just beginning. But the polite mode, the careful, quiet way people usually spoke in rooms like this, had turned off. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. And in that quiet space, something real had started to grow. Diane Cho looked out at the room full of faces, tired, worried, but no longer silent. She took a deep breath. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than before. "Thank you for your honesty. We hear you." This time the words didn't feel like a script. They felt like a promise, and for the first time in a long time the people in the room believed her. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after Diane Cho spoke. Not the quiet of boredom or waiting, but the kind of quiet that comes after something important has been said, when everyone is thinking, feeling, wondering what comes next. Rain still fell outside, but softer now, like the city itself was listening. No one moved to leave. No one checked their phone. Even the baby in the sling had stopped fussing, as if sensing the shift in the air. The usual rhythm of the meeting, the neat order of speakers, the polite thanks, the quick move to the next item, was gone. In its place was something raw and real, like a wound finally being cleaned so it can heal. Then, from the back row, a young woman stood. She held her baby close with one arm and stepped toward the microphone with slow, careful steps. Her name was Tasha Moore. She lived in the New Columbia neighborhood, a public housing community on the city's north side. She hadn't planned to speak tonight. She'd only come to support a friend. But something about the way people were talking, the honesty, the lack of masks, made her feel like she could say what she really thought. "My daughter is 6 months old," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I walk her to the park every day, but our sidewalks are broken. Some parts are so uneven I have to carry the stroller. And the street? Cars fly down it like it's a highway. There's no speed bump, no crosswalk, nothing." She looked at the council. "I called the city last year. They said they'd look into it. Then I got a letter saying my area wasn't in the current funding cycle. What does that mean? That my daughter's safety isn't worth money right now?" She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. But her eyes held a kind of tired anger that everyone in the room could feel. "I work nights at a hospital," she went on. "I don't have time to come to meetings every month. I don't have time to send 10 emails. But I'm here tonight because I'm tired of pretending that 'we'll get to it' means anything. You say you care about families. But do you care about all of us? Or just the ones who live where it's easy to care?" She stepped back. No one clapped. But several people nodded. A man near the front wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Diane Cho opened her mouth, then closed it. She wanted to say the usual things. We understand your concern. We're committed to equity. But the words felt hollow now, like empty boxes with nothing inside. So she just said, "Thank you, Ms. Moore, that's important." Then a teenager with a skateboard under his arm walked up. His name was Leo. He was 15 with messy brown hair and a hoodie that said "Ride Safe." He lived in southeast Portland, near a busy intersection with no bike lane and no signal for pedestrians. "I bike to school," he said. "It's 5 miles. My mom hates it, but the bus takes an hour. Last month, a car turned right without looking and clipped my handlebar. I fell, scraped my arm bad. The driver didn't even stop. He looked down at his shoes, then back up. I told the crossing guard. She said, 'Be more careful,' but I was being careful. The road just isn't built for people like me. It's built for cars, and I guess people who drive cars matter more." His voice cracked a little, but he kept going. "You keep saying active transportation like it's some fancy idea. But for me, it's just how I get around. And if you don't make it safe, you're saying my life isn't worth protecting." He stepped away. The room felt heavier now, like each truth added weight to the air. Marcus Lynn watched from his seat. He thought about his own silence over the years, how he'd assumed someone else would speak up or that his voice didn't matter. But now he saw silence wasn't peace. It was permission. Then Mr. Chen, who ran the corner store on 82nd Avenue, stood. He'd been in Portland for 30 years. He spoke slowly with a gentle accent. "Every day kids walk past my store to school," he said. "In winter it's dark when they leave. No streetlights. Cars don't slow down. I see them hugging the edge of the road, scared." He looked at the council. "I pay taxes. I follow the rules. I clean my sidewalk. But when I ask for help, they say, 'Your area is under review.' Under review for what? How long does it take to decide if children should be safe?" He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Everyone understood. One by one, more people spoke. Not many, just enough. A bus driver talked about how routes in poor neighborhoods get cut first. A nurse described patients who couldn't walk to clinics because sidewalks were missing. A veteran said he couldn't use his prosthetic leg on the broken pavement near his apartment. And through it all, the council sat still. No interruptions. No rushed replies. They just listened. Robert Reynolds, who had once called certain neighborhoods low-return zones, now stared at his hands. He thought about the emails he'd sent, the cold, efficient words that sounded smart in a meeting but felt cruel in this room. He hadn't meant to hurt anyone. He'd just been practical. But practical for whom? Aisha Patel, who had quoted kids in speeches before, now realized she'd never actually asked the parents what they needed. She'd used their stories as decoration, not as truth. Diane Cho felt a deep ache in her chest. She had prided herself on running fair meetings. But fairness wasn't just about giving everyone 3 minutes to speak. It was about making sure their words led to action. And for years they hadn't. The clock passed 8, then 8:15. Still, no one moved to end the meeting. Staff members in the back stopped taking notes. One turned off the recorder, then turned it back on, unsure what to do. Jamal Wright watched it all. He hadn't planned for this. He'd only wanted to expose the truth, not start a flood. But now he saw. Once one person speaks honestly, others feel safe to do the same. It's like a dam breaking, not with force but with pressure that's been building for years. Elena Ruiz sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She thought about her students, how she'd taught them to be kind, to raise their hands, to wait their turn. But she'd never taught them that sometimes the system doesn't reward kindness, it ignores it. Maybe that was her failure too. Then slowly Diane Cho stood up. She didn't bang her gavel. She didn't say, "Time's up." Instead, she walked around the council table and stood near the microphone facing the room. I don't have the right words right now," she began, her voice unsteady. "But I want you to know I hear you. Not as data points. Not as constituents, but as people. As neighbors." She looked at Marcus. At Tasha, at Leo, at Mr. Chen, at Jamal. "For too long," she said, "we've treated your patience as permission to delay. Your politeness as proof that things are fine. But they're not fine. And we were wrong." A murmur moved through the room, not of anger but of surprise. Council members didn't admit fault. Not like this. Robert Reynolds stood too. He cleared his throat. "I wrote those emails," he said. "I called your neighborhoods low return. I thought I was being honest about budgets. but I was being cruel without meaning to. And that's still cruel, he looked down. I'm sorry. Aisha Patel stood next. I used your stories to sound caring in meetings, but I didn't fight hard enough to change things. That wasn't respect. That was performance. One by one, the council members spoke, not with polished statements, but with simple, broken honesty. No jargon, no spin. Just I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and we'll do better. The people in the room didn't cheer. They didn't forgive right away, but they listened. And for the first time, it felt like both sides were speaking the same language. Outside, the rain stopped. A sliver of moon appeared through the clouds. Inside, the meeting wasn't over. But something had changed. The polite mode, the careful dance of saying what's acceptable, had turned off. And in its place was something messy, human, and real. Marcus Lynn felt a strange hope. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth was finally on the table. And truth, he thought, is where real change begins. Elena Ruiz smiled softly. She remembered telling her students, your voice matters. Tonight, she finally believed it herself. And Jamal right? He just sat back, closed his eyes for a moment, and breathed. The weight he'd carried for years felt a little lighter. The night was long. The work ahead would be longer. But for the first time in a long time, it felt possible. The room felt different now. Not lighter exactly, but clearer, like fog had lifted and everyone could finally see each other. The council members still sat behind their long table, but they no longer looked like distant officials. They looked like people who had just woken up to something they'd been ignoring for years. Diane Cho stayed standing near the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice grew steadier as she spoke. We can't fix everything tonight, she said, but we can start by being honest, and by listening, not just tonight, but every night. She turned to Robert Reynolds. You said you were wrong. I was too. I thought keeping things calm meant keeping things fair. But calm isn't always fair. Sometimes calm is just silence dressed up as peace. Robert nodded. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I spent so much time thinking about budgets and timelines that I forgot about people, he said. I treated neighborhoods like numbers on a spreadsheet. But they're not. They're homes, families, lives. Aisha Patel stepped forward. I want to do more than say sorry, she said. I want to change how we make decisions. What if instead of deciding for people, we decide with them? No one had a perfect plan. But for the first time, they weren't pretending they did. Then Jamal Wright stood again. Not to accuse, but to offer something. I've been part of a group that's been tracking city spending for 2 years, he said. We have maps, data, stories. We didn't share it before because we thought no one would care. But if you're serious, we're willing to work with you. Diane looked at him, really looked at him. Not as a problem to manage, but as a partner. We are serious, she said. And we'd be honored. Marcus Lynn raised his hand. What would that look like, he asked. Real talk, not just another committee that meets once and disappears. Good question, Diane said. She turned to the room. What if we created a new group? Made up of residents from every part of the city, especially the ones we've ignored. You'd help design the next bike lanes, sidewalks, streetlights, not just give feedback. You'd have real power, real votes, people exchange glances. It sounded too good to be true. But Diane's eyes were clear. She meant it. Elena Ruiz spoke up. I'm old, she said with a small smile. But I still have time to help. And I know others who do too. Teachers, retired workers, parents. We've been quiet because we thought it didn't matter. But maybe it does. A young woman near the front, Tasha, the mother with the baby, said, I can't come to meetings every week, but I can share what my neighbors need. Maybe we can use phones, texts, simple ways to stay involved. Yes, Diane said. No more barriers. If you have something to say, we'll find a way to hear it. The night stretched on, but no one seemed to mind. The usual rules of the meeting, time limits, formal procedures were forgotten. This wasn't a performance anymore. It was a conversation. Councilman Thomas Green, who rarely spoke, finally raised his voice. I grew up in Park Rose, he said quietly. My mom cleaned offices downtown. We didn't have much. I joined the council because I wanted to help people like us. But somewhere along the way, I started acting like the people I used to fight for. He looked around. I lost my way. But tonight reminds me why I started. Maria Lopez, the other quiet council member, added, We've been so afraid of conflict that we avoided truth. But truth isn't the enemy of peace. Lies are. One by one the walls came down, not just from the public but from the council too. They admitted they were tired of pretending. Tired of saying we'll look into it when they knew nothing would happen. Tired of choosing comfort over courage. Jamal pulled out his phone and showed a simple map on the screen. "This is where bike lanes were built in the last 3 years," he said. Red dots covered downtown and the west side. The east side, North Portland, outer southeast, barely any. "This isn't an accident," he said. "It's a choice." Diane studied the map. "Then we choose differently now." She turned to her staff in the back. "Cancel the next planning meeting. We're starting over, and this time, the first people at the table will be the ones who live on the streets we're talking about." A city planner named Greg, who had given the dry presentation earlier, stepped forward. "I can help," he said. "I've wanted to do better. I just didn't know how." "Now you do," Marcus said. "Start by asking us what we need, not what you think we need." Outside, the sky began to lighten. Not dawn yet, but the deep black of night was softening to gray. Inside, the air felt charged with something new. Not excitement exactly, but purpose. Elena Ruiz stood and walked to the front. She didn't go to the mic. She just stood near Diane. "I'll help organize," she said. "I know people in every neighborhood. We can gather stories, needs, ideas. Not just complaints, solutions too." Diane reached out and gently touched Elena's arm. "Thank you," she said. And this time the words carried weight. Then Leo, the teenager with the skateboard, spoke again. "Can students be part of this too? We use these streets every day. We know what's broken." "Absolutely," Aisha said. "You're not just the future. You're part of the now." Slowly a plan began to form, not written in stone but sketched in hope. A new task force, equal seats for residents and officials, monthly meetings in different neighborhoods, not just City Hall. Simple language, no jargon. Real decisions, not just suggestions. And most importantly, no more polite lies. As the first hints of morning light touched the windows, Diane looked around the room. Faces were tired, but eyes were bright. No one had all the answers. But for the first time they were asking the right questions together. "I know trust is broken," she said. "And trust isn't rebuilt with promises. It's rebuilt with action. So here's our first action. Next week we'll publish every email, every memo, every decision about transportation funding for the last 5 years. No hiding," people nodded. Transparency wasn't a gift. It was a duty. Robert added, "And we'll redirect the next round of bike lane funding to the neighborhoods that have waited the longest. Not because it's easy, but because it's right." Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Jamal looked at the council not with anger now, but with cautious hope. "We'll hold you to it," he said. "And you should," Diane replied. The meeting had long passed its scheduled end, but no one moved to leave. They stayed, talking in small groups, residents and council members side by side, not across a divide. Someone offered coffee. Elena shared her chamomile tea. Leo showed a council member how to hold a skateboard properly. It wasn't perfect. Old habits would be hard to break. There would be setbacks, disagreements, hard days ahead, but something fundamental had shifted. Humanity's polite mode, the habit of smiling while being ignored, of saying thank you when you mean this isn't enough, had turned off. Not with shouting or signs, but with quiet courage and shared truth. And in that space, something real could finally grow. As the first rays of sun broke over the rooftops of Portland, the people in the council chamber didn't see enemies or officials or problems. They saw neighbors, and for the first time in a long time, they believed they could build something better. Together. The meeting ended just after 6 in the morning. No gavel, no formal closing. Just a quiet agreement that they would meet again, and soon. People stood slowly, stretching stiff limbs, rubbing tired eyes. The rain had stopped hours ago, and pale sunlight now touched the wet streets outside. The city was waking up, but inside the council chamber something had already been born. No one called it a victory. It was too early for that. But as they filed out, some hugging, some shaking hands, some just walking quietly side by side, they all felt it. A shift. Like a door that had been stuck for years had finally opened, not with force but with truth. In the days that followed, the story spread. Not through press releases or official statements, but through texts, Group chats, church bulletins, bus stop conversations. Did you hear about the meeting? People asked. They actually listened. A local journalist who had stayed until the end posted a short video online, just 30 seconds of Jamal speaking. Then Diane's apology, then Elena saying, "Your voice matters." It got thousands of views in hours. National news picked it up. They called it the Portland Unmasking, but locals didn't use that name. They just said, "The night we stopped pretending." City Hall buzzed with a new kind of energy. Staff who had grown used to quiet resignation now found themselves answering real questions from real people. Emails poured in, not angry rants, but clear, thoughtful messages. "My block needs a crosswalk. Can we fix the sidewalk on 112th? My kid's school has no safe bike route." And for the first time, someone replied, not with a form letter, but with a name, a plan, and a timeline. Diane Cho kept her word. The next week, the city published every email, memo, and budget note about transportation from the past 5 years. It wasn't pretty. Some messages showed clear bias. Others revealed how decisions were made based on who donated to campaigns, not who needed help most. But instead of hiding it, the council held a public forum to explain it and to apologize again. Robert Reynolds didn't run from his words. He stood at that forum and said, "I called your neighborhoods low return. That was wrong. Your lives aren't returns on investment. They're the reason this city exists." People didn't cheer, but they nodded. That was enough. The new task force formed quickly. They called it the People's Planning Circle. It had 12 members, 6 residents from neighborhoods long ignored: Crestwood, Lent, St. John's, New Columbia, Park Rose, and Outer Southeast, and 6 city staff, including Diane, Robert, and 2 planners. Marcus Lynn joined. So did Jamal, Elena, and Tasha Moore. Leo the teenager became the youngest member at 15. They met not in the council chamber, but in community centers, libraries, even Elena's living room, where she served tea and cookies. Their first job was simple: decide where the next bike lanes and sidewalk repairs would go. In the past, this would have taken months of closed-door meetings. Now they did it in 3 weeks. They looked at the data, yes, but they also listened to stories. They walked the streets together. Marcus showed them the spot where his niece almost got hit. Tasha pointed out the broken sidewalk near her building. Leo biked the dangerous route to school with them, following in cars, and then they voted. Not by title, but by person, 1 vote each. The first project approved was a protected bike lane and new crosswalks on 42nd Avenue in Crestwood, the very street Marcus lived on. Next came sidewalk repairs in Lentz, streetlights in St. John's, and a traffic calming plan for New Columbia. Work began within a month. Not with ribbon cuttings or speeches, but with crews showing up early, laying fresh pavement, painting bright lines, installing signs that said, "Slow, children walking." Kids noticed first. Parents cried when they saw the new crosswalks. Elders walked to the store without fear. Elena Ruiz started a weekly neighbor talk night in her living room. Anyone could come: council members, students, shop owners, bus drivers. They didn't debate policy. They shared meals and stories. "We rebuild trust 1 cup of tea at a time," she'd say. Marcus kept his day job but spent evenings helping design a simple app where people could report broken sidewalks or dangerous intersections with a photo and a pin on a map. The city adopted it. Within weeks, over 2,000 reports came in. Most were fixed in under 10 days. Jamal didn't stop at transportation. He and others began asking harder questions. Why were some parks never cleaned? Why did trash pickup skip certain blocks? Why were mental health services only downtown? The People's Planning Circle grew to include housing, parks, and public safety. The model spread. Other cities took notice. Representatives from Seattle, Oakland, and Minneapolis came to Portland to learn. "How did you do it?" they asked. Diane always gave the same answer. "We stopped talking at people and started listening with them." But the real change wasn't in policies or projects. It was in the air. At council meetings, people still spoke their minds, but now they also listened. Disagreements happened, but they didn't turn into battles. They turned into conversations. And when someone said, "That doesn't work for my neighborhood," the reply wasn't, "We'll note that." It was, "Tell us more." Diane Cho changed too. She still believed in order, but now she knew order without justice was just control. She began every meeting not with the agenda but with a question. What truth haven't we heard yet? Sometimes the answer was hard. But they faced it together. Robert Reynolds sold his interest in the real estate firm and started working full-time on equitable development. "I spent years building for the few," he said at a community event. "Now I want to build for everyone." Aisha Patel ran for mayor the next year, and won. Her campaign slogan was simple: listen first. Years later, people would look back on that rainy Tuesday night as the turning point. Not because everything was fixed that night, but because the pretending stopped. Humanity's polite mode, the habit of staying quiet to keep the peace, had turned off. And in its place came something stronger: honest connection. The bike lanes got built. The sidewalks were repaired. Streetlights came on in dark corners. But more than that, people felt seen. Not as voters, not as problems, but as neighbors with lives that mattered just as much as anyone else's. On the 1-year anniversary of the meeting, the city held a small gathering in a newly renovated park in St. John's. There were no speeches, just music, food, and kids playing on safe paths. Diane stood near a bench watching. Marcus pushed his niece on a swing. Jamal chatted with Robert about a new housing project. Elena handed out cookies from a tin. A reporter asked Diane, "Do you think this change will last?" She smiled. "It has to," she said, "because now we know what happens when we forget. Silence grows and people stop believing. But when we listen, really listen, we remember we're all in this together." And as the sun set over Portland, casting long shadows on clean sidewalks and quiet streets, the city didn't feel perfect. But it felt honest. And in that honesty there was hope. Not loud or flashy, but steady. Like a streetlight that finally turns on after years of darkness.